Chapter 10. One of the unsettling things about my journey, mentally, physically, and emotionally, was that I wasn't sure when or where it was going to end. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I felt that I was starting over and over again. I was always on the move, always going somewhere. While we walked, I sometimes lagged behind, thinking about these things. To survive each passing day was my goal in life. At villages where we managed to find some happiness by being treated to food or fresh water, I knew that it was temporary and that we were only passing through. So I couldn't bring myself to be completely happy. It was much easier to be sad than to go back and forth between emotions, and this gave me the determination I needed to keep moving. I was never disappointed, since I always expected the worst to happen. There were nights when I couldn't sleep but stared into the darkest night until my eyes could see clearly through it. I thought about where my family was and whether they were alive. One night, while I was outside of a village square thinking about how far I'd come and what might lie ahead, I looked into the sky and saw how the thick clouds kept trying to cover the moon, yet it would reappear again and again to shine all night long. In some way, my journey was like that of the moon, although I had even more thick clouds coming my way to make my spirit dull. I remembered something that Saidu had said one evening when we had survived another attack of men with spears and axes. Juma, Mariba, and Musa were asleep on the veranda we occupied. Al-Haji, Kanu, Saidu, and I were awake and quietly listening to the night. Saidu's heavy breathing made our silence less unbearable. After a few hours had gone by, Saidu spoke in a very deep voice, as if someone were speaking through him. "How many more times do we have to come to terms with death before we find safety?" he asked. He waited a few minutes, but the three of us didn't say anything. He continued. "Every time people come at us with the intention of killing us, I close my eyes and wait for death. Even though I am still alive, I feel like each time I accept death, part of me dies. Very soon, I will completely die, and all that will be left is my empty body walking with you. It will be quieter than I am." Saidu blew on the palms of his hands to warm them and lay on the floor. His heavy breathing intensified, and I knew he had fallen asleep. Gradually, Kanai and then Alhaji fell asleep. I sat on a wooden bench against the wall and thought about Saidu's words. Tears formed in my eyes and my forehead became warm, thinking about what Saidu had said. I tried not to believe that I too was dying slowly on my way to find safety. The only time I was able to fall asleep that night was when the last morning breeze, the one containing the irresistible urge to sleep, saved me from my wandering mind. Even though our journey was difficult, every once in a while we were able to do something that was normal and made us happy for a brief moment. One morning we arrived at a village where the men were getting ready to go hunting. They invited us to join them. At the end of the hunt, one of the older men shouted, pointing at us, "We are going to feast tonight, and the strangers are welcome to stay." The other men clapped and began walking on the path back to the village. We walked behind them. They sang, carrying their nets and animals, mostly porcupines and deer, that had been caught on their shoulders. Upon our arrival at the village, the women and children clapped to welcome us. It was past midday. The sky was blue and the wind was picking up. Some of the men shared the meat among several households, and the rest was given to the women to be cooked for the feast. We hung about in the village and fetched water for the women who were preparing the food. Most of the men had returned to work the farms. I walked around the village by myself and found a hammock on one of the verandas. I lay in it, singing slowly to get my thoughts in motion. I began to think about the times when I had visited my grandmother, and I would sleep in the hammock at the farm. I would wake up staring into her eyes as she played with my hair. She would tickle me and then hand me a cucumber to eat. Junior and I would sometimes fight for the hammock, and if he got it, I would trick him by loosening its ropes so that he would fall once he sat in it. This would discourage him, and he would go about the farm doing something else. My grandmother knew my tricks and made fun of me, calling me a karsaloi, which means spider. In many Mende stories, the spider is the main character that tricks other animals to get what he wants. But these tricks always backfire on him. As I was thinking about these things, I fell out of the hammock. I was too lazy to get up, so I just sat on the ground and thought about my two brothers, my father, my mother, my grandmother. I wished to be with them. I put my hands behind my back and lay on my back, trying to hold on to the memories of my family. Their faces seemed to be far off somewhere in my mind, and to get to them, I had to bring up painful memories. I longed for the gentle, dark, and shiny old hands of my grandmother, my mother's tight and closed embrace during the times I visited her, as if hiding and protecting me from something, my father's laughter when we played soccer together, and when he sometimes chased me in the evening with a bowl of cool water to get me to take a shower, my older brother's arms around me when we walked to school, and when he sometimes elbowed me to stop me from saying things I would regret. and my little brother, who looked exactly like me and would sometimes tell people that his name was Ishmael when he did something wrong. I had trouble conjuring up these thoughts, and when I finally ventured into these memories, I became so sad that the bones of my body started to ache. I went to the river, dove into the water, and sat on the bottom, but my thoughts followed me. In the evening, after everyone had returned to the village, the food was brought outside to the village square. It was divided among plates, and 7 people ate from each plate. After the meal, the villagers played drums, and we all joined hands in the circle under the moonlight. During an interval of several songs, one of the men announced that when the dancing had been exhausted, "Whenever that will be," he said jokingly, "the strangers will tell us stories about where they are from." He lifted his hands and motioned for the drummers to continue. During the festivities, I thought about the biggest celebration we used to have in my town at the end of the year. The women would sing about all the gossip, dramas, the fights, and everything that had happened that year. Would they be able to sing about all that will happen by the end of this war? I thought. I also wondered a bit why the villagers were so kind to us, but I didn't dwell on these thoughts because I wanted to enjoy myself. The dance never ended that night, and we had to leave early the next day, so we left as most of the villagers slept. We carried with us a plastic gallon of water and some smoked meat we had been given, and the older people we passed, sitting on their verandas, waiting to be warmed by the morning sun, waved and said, "May the spirit of the ancestors be with you, children." When we were walking, I turned around to see the village one last time. It was yet to be born for the day. A cock crowed to dispatch the last remains of night and to mute the crickets that couldn't let go of the darkness of their own accord. The sun was slowly rising, but had already begun casting shadows on the huts and houses. I could still hear the drums echoing in my head from the previous night, but I refused to be happy. When I turned away from the village, my traveling companions were dancing in the sand, mimicking some of the dances we had seen. "Show us what you've got," they said, clapping and circling me. I couldn't refuse. I started gyrating my hips to their claps, and they joined me. We placed our hands on each other's shoulders and walked forward, dancing to sounds we made with our mouths. I was carrying the smoked meat in a small bag that I waved in air to increase the speed at which we kicked our feet from side to side. We danced and laughed into the morning, but gradually we stopped. It was as if we all knew that we could be happy, but only for a brief moment. We weren't in a hurry, so we walked slowly and quietly after we stopped dancing. At the end of the day, we had finished drinking the water we were carrying. Around nightfall, we arrived at a very peculiar village. I'm in fact not sure if it was a village. There was one large house and one kitchen less than a kilometer from the house. The pots were moldy and there was a small storage house. The place was located in the middle of nowhere. "Now this will be an easy village for the rebels to capture," Juma said, laughing. We walked around trying to find a sign of someone's presence. Some sort of production of palm oil had taken place here. There were the remains of palm nut seeds everywhere. On the river floating a deserted canoe in which a spiroga had grown. Back at the old house, we debated where to sleep. We sat outside on logs on the foot of the veranda, and Musa offered to tell a story about Bra Spider. "No," we protested. We all knew it too well. But he continued. "Bra Spider stories are always good, no matter how many times you have heard them," Musa said. "My mother told me that whenever a story is told, it's worth listening to. So please listen. I will tell it quickly." He coughed and began. Bra Spider lived in a village that was surrounded by many other villages. At the end of the harvest season, all the villages had a feast in the celebration of their successful harvest. Wine and food were in abundance, and people ate until they could see their reflections on each other's stomachs. "What?" we all said, in shock of this extra detail he had added to the story. "I'm telling the story, so I can tell my version. Wait for your turn." Musa stood up. We listened attentively to see if he was going to embellish the story with any more striking details. He sat down and continued. Each village specialized in one dish. Bra Spider's village made okra soup with palm oil and fish. The other villages made cassava leaves with meat, potato leaves, and so on. Each village boasted about how good their meal was going to be. All the villages had an open invitation to their feasts, but Bra Spider took it to the extreme. He wanted to be present at all of the feasts. He had come up with a plan. He began collecting ropes around his village and weaving them several months before the feast. While people carried bushels of rice, bundles of wood to the square, and women pounded rice in mortars and removed the husk from its seeds, Bra Spider was stretching the ropes on his veranda and measuring their length. When men went hunting, he was busy laying his ropes by the paths of his village to all the surrounding villages. He gave the ends of his ropes to the chiefs who tied them to the nearest trees in the village square. "Tell your people to pull the rope when their meal is ready," he told every chief in his nasal voice. Bra Spider starved for a week as he readied himself.